Next time you're ready to buy something on Amazon, use our special link by going to wakeupcallpodcast.com/Amazon. With books, movies, clothes, toys, electronics, and all of the other wonderful products that Amazon has to offer, you can make your regular purchases and help support the show. Go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/Amazon. That's wakeupcallpodcast.com/Amazon to make your Amazon purchases and help support the Wake Up Call podcast at no extra cost to you. Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Jake Heilbrunn about his book, Off the Beaten Trail, a young man's soul-searching journey through Central America. Jake is an author, lifestyle blogger, and inspirational speaker. He writes the Eyes Fully Open blog, where he discusses topics related to personal development, nonconformity, mental health, change and uncertainty, meaning and purpose, travel, and more. You can follow his work at jakeheilbrunn.com. That's Jake, HEILBRUNN.com. You can find him on Facebook via the Jake Heilbrunn author page and on Twitter at Jake_Heilbrunn. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/trail. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. So I have to say, reading this book, it's very beautifully written, very inspiring. It really brought out a lot of emotions in me as I was reading it. Just I'm sure it brought out a lot of emotions in you as you were writing it. But now that I've heaped all that praise on you, can you give an overview of the book and what's contained in it?
Yeah, of course. So the book is a memoir. It's about my journey taking kind of a leap of faith and leaving college after developing a chronic skin condition and kind of an internal conflict. I developed severe anxiety and kind of fell into a depression and kind of questioned the path of my life, waking up this way after months, just feeling so unfulfilled, so unhappy. And I just realized I wasn't living a life that was in alignment with what I believed in, and it was kind of manifesting in this chronic skin condition. And eventually I summoned up the courage and took the leap after many sleepless, anxious nights. And I hopped on a flight to Guatemala with my backpack and spent 4 months volunteering and kind of soul searching, meeting amazing people throughout Central America. And it's really just a journey of self-discovery, and it completely changed my life. So I just take the reader on the journey with me.
Right, and what a journey it is, and I want to dig into that journey in just a little bit, but can you talk about your background a little more and what motivated you to take this type of trip, to take the leap of faith that you took?
Of course. So I grew up in San Diego, California, very fortunate to go to a great high school. I played soccer most of my life, and growing up in the community I did, it was kind of expected that you worked really hard in high school, and if you had the opportunity to go to college, which I did, that was what you did. It wasn't really any questions asked. No one really did anything outside of that script. And so I got to college, and just 3 days after arriving, I broke out in hives and rashes, like all over my legs and arms. And I had no idea why. I've always had sensitive skin, but nothing like this. And just day after day, I kept waking up with these hives and rashes, and I saw doctors, immunologists, dermatologists. I had the pills, creams, tests, and they didn't know what was going on. So they diagnosed me with chronic urticaria, which is like a fancy name for saying your skin's freaking out, and we don't know why. And yeah, I mean, I was 17. I just turned to 18, like a month or two into college, and I didn't understand why my skin was freaking out. It was so uncomfortable. It felt like my skin was on fire almost 24/7. And I developed severe anxiety, and I was kind of fell into sort of this why me? Like I didn't understand why all this was happening to me. I didn't understand what was going on. I started kind of having an existential crisis, like questioning the purpose of life, the purpose of my life. And I realized that, I was a Dean's List student, but I had no passion for what I was doing. And I felt like there's so many people who hate their jobs. I think it's 7 or 8 out of every 10 people are dissatisfied with their job. Anxiety and depression are at a very high rate. And I just felt like I was just going to be one of those numbers. I was one of those numbers. And I realized that there was this dream that kept calling out to me, which was this idea of travel. And I didn't really know why. It was just this yearning, this like call within me that wanted to explore different ways of life and take a leave from the path that I was on and see how other people lived and, volunteer and just pave my own path really. And so after a couple months, I just finally took that leap, and through a site called Workaway, which is like a travel cultural exchange website where you kind of create a profile and you reach out to people all over the world. I found this guy in Guatemala, and he said, just come on over. You can teach some English and help volunteer in this community. We need all the help we can get. And I was 18, and I packed my backpack, I ditched my cell phone, and off I went. And that was really the start of the journey.
Okay, so let's go to the start of the journey then. You land at the airport in Guatemala City, and you have to get to this small rural community where you're going to teach English and do what you can to help that community. So how did you get to that community? Because I know that story is rather interesting and different from what many listeners are probably used to when they land at an airport and try to get to another city or another town. So what was that like, and what were your initial impressions of your surroundings landing in Guatemala? Because I assume you had never been to Guatemala before, right? So what were your initial impressions landing in Guatemala and trying to get to your destination?
It's a great question. And to give the listener some context, so I was 18. Other than hola and gracias, didn't speak Spanish. I didn't bring a cell phone because I wanted to get away from social media. And I essentially had like a 3-line email from this guy saying, when you get to Guatemala, take a taxi to the bus station, then buy a 9-hour ticket bus ride to this town, and then take a tuk-tuk here and ask for Chris the Gringo because the homes have no addresses and there's only Wi-Fi in the small cafe. So that was what I was working with. And I had never traveled alone before. So I get to the airport, and I remember immediately walking outside. There was a little, just from the smell in the air, like it was so different. I flew out of LA, and I remember driving through some of the Beverly Hills area, and then just the contrast getting to Guatemala in the taxi. They're like, people don't use their blinkers. It's just kind of crazy. I felt like I was in a real life game of Frogger. Just the people, of course, look different. I mean, I'm in a different country. So it's from the aesthetic to just the feeling. I felt like I was in a whole another world. And I met this kind gentleman on my airplane flight. We were talking because he had a soccer logo on his hat. So that was kind of like a way I could start talking with him. And his brother was picking him up, and he was kind enough to give me a ride to the bus station. So once I got to the bus station, he helped me buy a ticket because I barely spoke Spanish. And about an hour or two into our ride, we stopped. I mean, there was traffic as far as the eye could see ahead of us. We were on this small one-way road, and looking backwards, we were backed up. And for 8 hours, we're just stuck on the side of this road. And, I figured out there was some sort of roadblock or accident up ahead, but I didn't know like what to make of it. I mean, everyone was just hanging out outside of their vehicles like it was no big deal. And I'm sitting here like, 8 hours in one day, like how these people are so calm. It was funny because it made me think about in the US, like people are 10 minutes late, they freak out. These people had an 8-hour delay, and they took it into stride. And it was really interesting for me to see that. And I had a soccer ball in my backpack that I pumped up and started juggling to make some friends because I was like, how can I communicate with these people? I don't, other than hola and gracias. So that was a really cool situation because it challenged me and made me think about different ways to connect non-verbally, and soccer was a huge way to do that.
Yeah, and I want to return to that idea of soccer being a universal language, because that was a very powerful and significant theme throughout your book. So I definitely want to come back to that. But can you talk about what the transportation was like, not just getting from Guatemala City to the community where you were going to teach English, but just in general, what was transportation like moving within Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, and what was the infrastructure like that you were going on and that you were seeing?
There was a variety of different ways of transportation and infrastructure. So everything from the most basic local way of transportation, which I used, which was chicken buses. They're essentially rundown American school buses that are deemed, I think, unqualified for the U.S. and then are sent down to Latin America. And they're decorated with a lot of Christian ideology and repainted. And they're called chicken buses because chickens are common passengers. So a lot of times they're cram buses with people on them. And I use chicken buses often. They also have these little 3-wheeled vehicles like mini taxis called tuk-tuks. They're like bright red. And those are used often from getting little towns to towns. But if you're going on a long ride, chicken buses are the local way of transportation. But there also is a lot of like in the certain tourist towns, like there's little towns throughout where you can get like a van or kind of like a not like quite a charter bus, but they have these big buses that go on long trips. And of course there's airfare too. So I kind of used a variety of all three of those ways. And the infrastructure is definitely different, especially on the chicken bus. I mean, you're hitting some rough, bumpy roads on this school bus, and people are standing. Some people even sat on the roof. So it was definitely a lot different from anything I'd ever experienced. The safety protocols were not what you would expect in the U.S., but people were always friendly. And I loved riding in the chicken buses. It was such an experience to me, just like looking around. Like, I remember one woman once just passed me her baby to hold for a second while she had to get something out of her bag. And like, it was just so different. Like, she just trusted me. And of course just holding her baby for a minute, but from the clothing to just the way they approach life to having a couple of chickens on their arms on a bus, like, it was just so different. And I really enjoyed it. And, just processing all the information.
Yeah. So let's get back to the very first portion of your trip. So you arrive in this small rural community in northern Guatemala. You've navigated the transportation system well enough to get to that community from Guatemala City and the airport there. So what were your first impressions of that community, and what was the culture like in the community where you ended up staying for a significant portion of your trip, teaching English, playing soccer, hiking, and whatnot?
I'll never forget my first impression when I finally got to the town. I didn't know for sure if it was the town because I was asking, and I arrived essentially at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. It took me almost a day. I had to spend the night in this little hotel. And so I arrived, and I didn't know if it was the town, but I eventually got out, and I found this man walking by who had white skin. And I just started talking to him. I was like, hablas inglés? Like, do you speak English? And he said, yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. So the bus just dropped me off with this guy. And I was like, is this San Andres? He said, yeah. Turned out he was this German guy who was living in a town like 15 minutes away. He said I was really lucky to find him because there weren't many, white people, let alone English speakers, anywhere near this place. And he was just passing through because there was a little post office in this town, but it wasn't even open yet because it was a Saturday morning. But overlooked, so I follow him to get a cup of coffee, and most people are not up in this town. So we go to this little woman's setup, and overlooking, there's a huge hill that leads down to this most beautiful glistening lake, and it's sunny out, and it was a huge lake. Like, if I hadn't known it, I thought it could have been a bay leading into an ocean. Of course, I knew I was in the middle of Guatemala. That wasn't the case. But I remember these blue skies and just the possibility and the brightness. It was such a positive first experience of this town. And I got coffee with this guy, and he was telling me about his own journey, how he ended up. He had a cool story, which I'm sure you remember. His name was Peter in the story. But then I eventually found my host family and the guy threw Workaway. And people were just generous right away. And my host family, like the mom, Juanita, just gave me this hug. She was spitting rapid fire Spanish and gave me some Jamaica tea right away. And, we had lunch. And I met my family, the brothers and sisters who were in their 20s. And just in town, everyone seemed pretty friendly. They would look at you because I was obviously kind of like the fly in white milk there. But I had a really positive experience, and just there's such an amazing feeling of this unknown and curiosity when you're in this place that's such a physical location, so drastically different from anything I'd ever experienced. And it made me I really felt alive, to the fullest sense of the word. I was so just embracing the vivid details, like the colorful paintings on the walls and the homes, and the different stone streets and houses and the stray dogs, and all of it was so enlivening, really. And I just felt very happy to be there.
Okay, so let's move on to the school that you taught at, where you taught the kids English and soccer. So what was that experience like, and what was the school itself like? What was the building like? What was the class schedule like? Was this something that we would consider a public school? How would you describe the school and that experience?
Yeah, so the public school, it was a public school, and there were a couple small schools within the town, in the vicinity of the town. This was probably one of the poorer schools. So I taught 2 classes, actually. One in the morning was for kids who really had I think they had almost no resources. They didn't have any money for notebooks and things. And so that was the morning class. And then the afternoon class, which was one of the bigger, oh, I'm sorry, I mix it up, the different times, not that it matters. The afternoon class with kids with less resources. But essentially when I had come, he said, the people in this town need your help. A lot of the girls who their moms and their moms would make tortillas for a living. So that's literally what they do. And so essentially English is a vehicle for these children to have more opportunities and to be able to get out of the town and find better work and, do more with their life, have more of an option than just, for example, doing what their parents did. And there's, of course, nothing wrong with what their parents did, but it's just giving them opportunity, really. And English was a vehicle to do that. So I came in and I told them, I don't speak Spanish, but I'm willing to try and make a difference any way I can. And he said, look, come here. I'm going to get you with a class who hasn't spoken English before. Just try I told him I want to do whatever I can. So there was about 2 weeks before I started teaching English due to the Semana Santa holiday. So during that time, I finished a whole entire Spanish for Dummies textbook and was taking lessons with locals. So by the time that I was there, and of course, I'm the only English speaker other than the volunteers. So necessity is the mother of invention, right? I had to kind of learn Spanish quickly. But by the time teaching, I get to class and I'm hugged by all these students. It was such a joy. There was kind of like a chain link fence as their windows, and then the class was painted in this kind of rundown lime green color. And I just kind of started with some basic stuff that I had learned from some of the other volunteers. They had given me kind of like lesson plans and ways to structure my teaching. I learned quickly that I had to be creative. So I used English music and dance to teach, which I found to be very effective. And soccer, they loved soccer. So I realized, my class was fourth graders. So I knew that I had to be creative to keep their attention span because they were all very eager to learn English. But when it came to the actual work and doing part, I found it very difficult and frustrating because to sit down and focus is not fun. That's not the fun stuff. So to get them to do that was challenging, but it was a rewarding month really teaching them. And they did definitely learn a lot in the month that I was there. And I learned probably even more from them, just like the way they were, their outlook, Spanish from them. So it was really just an incredible experience.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing experience. So not only were you coming in contact with culture in terms of people who speak Spanish, people who are native to Guatemala, but you also came into contact with elements of Mayan culture, also people who are native to Guatemala, but a very different type of culture that you came into contact with. I know you talked about hiking through the jungle and seeing pyramids and Mayan ruins and all sorts of things related to Mayan culture. What was that experience like, and what were you able to learn about Mayan civilization and Mayan culture from that?
That was an amazing experience. Being in a place, so I hiked through El Mirador. So it's deep in the jungle. These pyramids haven't been excavated. And La Danta, one of these pyramids, is the largest pyramid in the northern hemisphere by volume. And just to be in this jungle place where there was no people because it's so deep in, Tikal is another popular place, but that's almost like a tourist location. This place was deep and hard to get to, and I had the opportunity to go there. And to be on these pyramids where there was once civilizations of tens and hundreds of thousands of people, and to hear the stories and be in places where they had blood sacrifices and just learning and being there was so awe-inspiring to see how these people created these pyramids back then. They're humongous pyramids, and the sophistication of some of the hieroglyphics and the sculptures that they created, and hearing some of the Mayan stories from Chris, who is the leader, or Mike, his name in the story, who knew a lot about the history because he took people on these tours to make some money. That's how he made money living in that town. It was incredible, and as I navigated throughout to Lake Atitlan, I got to learn more. And there's I think over 23 Mayan indigenous tribes that are of Guatemala. So there's so much culture to it. I love the clothing. They have these rich, colorful clothing that I'm sure some of the listeners might know of, seeing blankets and some designs from Guatemala and Mexico. The dyes actually come from the region of Lake Atitlan. So just to learn that and to experience some of these cultures and how the relationship with nature and what, certain colors represent. It was just really interesting for me and very outside the realm of what I had experienced before.
Yeah, and so a lot of the people you describe in your book seem to be very amazing individuals with very fascinating and inspiring stories. But I not to rank them, but I feel like the one who was really the most awe-inspiring is this man named Arnulfo. So what was he like, and then what were the poor, isolated indigenous communities like that you were exposed to thanks to Arnulfo?
Yeah, so I'd first heard about Arnulfo actually reading about him in the book called Into the Wind, although he has a different name in that book. He's kind of like more of an Americanized name. But I knew where to find him. He had a restaurant called Los Abrazos, which means the hugs. And I didn't really know much about him, like other than he had apparent just like wisdom. He was a human rights activist. And I found him. I didn't know anything about him in his story, really, other than that he had this apparent wisdom. So we connected and talked for a couple hours, and he comes from an ancient Mayan lineage called the Quiché. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's like with a K and an apostrophe, and I have it spelled in the book correctly. But he was just telling me about he grew up in the Guatemalan genocide, and there was a lot of communities in the Lake Atitlan region that were just stricken by poverty, and he invited me to come with him the next day after I met him he was going to go pass out some money and parcels for the people of this village. So I said I would love to come with him. And the next day I hop on his bike, we go, and we're walking around, and I'm passing out some stickers that I had brought with me to kind of connect with kids on my travels. And a lot of these people lived in these cylinder block huts, like 10 or 15 feet by 15 feet. A lot of the kids we saw had no shoes. He had found a lot of them sleeping in coffee plants because their parents had passed away. And the faces on a lot of the parents and grandparents were really dim. Like you could tell they'd been through a lot in their life. And the kids, were full of just joy once we started connecting. At first they were kind of looking at me at least, with kind of this unknown, like stoic face. And once, Arnulfo was talking to them and I gave them the stickers, they just lit up. And it was really powerful moment for me, because seeing these kids covered in dirt without shoes, and they were so excited to get stickers. And I realized in that moment how powerful humans are, and not in the sense of what we can build necessarily, but in the sense of how we can connect with someone. Like the fact that these kids got so excited and stoked about a sticker, like I just couldn't believe it. And it was the same reaction with almost every kid. And I remember getting back on the motorbike to come back, and I just thought about like how I could be making more of a difference in my own life. Like how much potential that I have within myself, how much we all have within ourselves to make a difference, because the sticker was just a bridge for connection and showing that you care. It wasn't about the shiny piece of paper. It was about what it represented. And it was actually that day that I decided I was going to write my book. Like I always had the idea, but it was the moment, because it was such a powerful day of connection. And, I'd never really been exposed to that level of poverty before. So it was very mind-opening. And Arnulfo has been helping those people for years. He's dedicated his life to helping the oppressed minorities of Guatemala and the post-genocide generation and getting them out of poverty. So to have the chance to see it with my own eyes was very powerful.
Yeah, and it's amazing, going back to the stickers point, it's amazing how an action so simple as just handing a young child some stickers, it's amazing the impact that action can have, and how that small action in and of itself can be of such a great benefit to the emotional state of these children. It's just amazing and heartwarming to read the way you described that in your book every time that you were handing out those stickers. But I want to move on from Guatemala to Nicaragua, which was the next country you went to. So what were your impressions of culture and living conditions in Nicaragua?
Nicaragua was interesting. The people, different people, the dialects changes a little bit. I found where I started in Leon, people had a little bit of a darker skin tones where I first went from, like an aesthetic point of view. Very kind, and I spent the first couple days living in this beach called Ponaloya, where I was building cob eco lodges made of cob, which is like this sustainable building material made of soil, sand or silt hay and water, and it's actually seismic resistant, so it's really cool. And there was some locals who were living with us who were employed to help build this eco lodge, and it was an amazing experience because the people were so kind and it was fun playing with the kids. But man, it was hot, and I was attacked by all these sandflies every night. I had hundreds of bites, so I didn't stay there too long. And I eventually made my way to this spiritual community that I'd heard about on this island called Ometepe. The community is called Inyanita. I think it might be a different name in the book. As you can tell by now, I changed names for like privacy purposes, but it was an incredible community. So I'm sure you read about it. They lived off the grid, basically on solar. They planted all their own organic crops. They had their own natural pool that like filtered into banana trees. And I was sort of drawn to this community and kind of on a spiritual path, you could say, where I was drawn towards places and people that were of a certain mentality. And this community, I lived there for 2 weeks, and I experienced some of the happiest times of my life there. There was a gratitude practice every night where everyone would just kind of gather around and say something they were grateful for. There was meditation every morning. It was my first real experience with breath work. The yoga in the afternoons, and just real deep, authentic connection. And I was the only American guy there, so most of them were European. And it was just so amazing to connect with these people. Experiences outside the realm of what I'd experienced. People went naked in the swimming pool, which for me, the first day I remember going in, and I was the first one in, and I had my swim trunks on, and quickly became the only guy with trunks on. And I was like, should I take my trunks off now? It was kind of weird. And then, of course, the next day I went naked, and it was kind of weird the first day. By the third day, I'm like cannonballing in, fully nude. But like the juxtaposition and, minor things like that, but they really shape your perspective, because then I started questioning, why is it such a big deal to go naked? Of course, I probably wouldn't do that at a beach in San Diego, but the whole idea was I was having these experiences that were making me think differently and really opening up my eyes. And I experienced this level of belonging and connection with people that really made me want to continue living this way, which was conducive to this happiness and connection with like-minded people.
Friends, I'm sure you're very busy, and you're going to make certain purchases no matter what. So when you need to buy clothes, toys, electronics, books, movies, sports equipment, or any number of other products, buy them through our special Amazon link by going to wakeupcallpodcast.com/Amazon. And particularly relevant for today's episode, you can purchase the book we've been discussing, Off the Beaten Trail, A Young Man's Soul-Searching Journey Through Central America by Jake Heilbrunn. Make your shopping experience easier and faster, and help support the Wake Up Call podcast by buying the stuff you're going to buy anyways through our link via wakeupcallpodcast.com/Amazon. Go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/Amazon. Again, that's wakeupcallpodcast.com/Amazon to make your regular purchases, and at no extra cost to you, help support the show and keep the Wake Up Call podcast going. Yeah, and one experience you had in Nicaragua that I want to take a moment to focus on was your experience as a hitchhiker. Now, going as a hitchhiker, trying to hitchhike a ride off of someone, that flies in the face of everything that we're taught in the United States. We're always taught not to be a hitchhiker and not to pick up hitchhikers. But you were in a position where you were more or less stuck hitchhiking. So what was that experience like, and what were you able to learn about Nicaraguan culture and human nature from that whole experience?
That was quite an experience. I was living in this town in the mountains, and I was actually the only guy in my hostel, which I was sort of bummed about. I figured I was going to meet people who we could go explore these mountain reserves that were like 30 minutes outside of the town we were staying, but no one was there. So I was like, I'm not going to not go just because I'm the only one. So I hopped on the chicken bus to this reserve, and they drop you off on the side of the road, and there's about a mile walk into the reserve. So I spent the day kind of exploring on my own, and I had apparently missed the time. I had mixed up the times for the last bus that day, that afternoon. Well, it wasn't that late. It was like, 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And I remember walking out, sprinting out the mile to the pickup station because I mixed up the time, and the guy was like, oh, no, the bus leaves in like 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. So I sprint out there, and I'm waiting for like 20, 30 minutes, and no one comes. And it's essentially just me on this huge mountain, windy, long road, and there's just beautiful nature around, but really not many people. And it started pouring. There were clouds coming in, and it was in the cloud forest, so that makes sense. And I realized, like, I didn't have many options. I didn't have much money on me. I could have gone back to the reserve and maybe figured something out, but it was a mile back the other way, and I didn't have money, like I mentioned. So the idea of hitchhiking came into my head, and I remember, of course, feeling the exact reserve that you just said. It went against everything I've ever been taught. I could literally picture my dad, like, saying, "Jake, don't you dare do that. Like, it's dangerous." But I said, okay, here I am. I'm stuck on this mountain. It's raining. I don't have many choices. And, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? I doubted that the person picking me up was going to be some awful human being. And I figured, if I get any slight off feeling, then I'm definitely not going to get in the car. Like, I knew I could just, get away. So I took me a couple tries. I remember, like, hesitating, putting my thumb up. I put it up once and took it down because I got nervous. And finally, I just did it. I kind of just imagined this nice person picking me up. And this guy pulls up. He has his 2 daughters in the front seat that I learned about. And I said, Matagalpa, ? That was the town I wanted to go to. And he's like, "Sí, vamos, get in." So I climb into the back of this guy's van, only to realize very soon that I'm sitting in the back of an ambulance. And I start talking to this guy, and it turns out he drove ambulances. Like, that was what his job. It just wasn't apparent. He didn't have, like, the Red Cross logo on the outside. But he was the kindest guy who literally saved lives for a living. And we talked, and I was talking with his daughters, and, I was in the back. But it was so powerful the whole day because I really was on my own that day. I explored these nature trails all by myself, and I went past this huge kind of accomplishment in my mind, which was taking kind of a risk and having faith in somebody else when I really felt like I was out of options. And the kindness I received from him, I tried paying him after when he dropped me off. He wouldn't accept it. It just taught me so much about kind of faith, really. And of course, you still it's not to say being reckless, but there are times in our lives where I believe that we are tested, and to just be shown that level of kindness, it shapes your perception. And, maybe some people might have a certain perception of people or Nicaragua, but my experience had been almost all positive. And of course, I think I was careful and I felt a good feeling, and it helped that he had 2 daughters in the car. It kind of made me feel comfortable, but really it was just a powerful experience.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. So let's move on to the last country you visited on your trip before heading back to the U.S., and that's Costa Rica. And one of the things you discuss in your book are the parts of Costa Rica that you don't hear about and that you don't see whenever you see programs on TV where they depict parts of Costa Rica. So what was that like? Not the touristy parts of Costa Rica, but seeing the parts that you don't really hear about.
Yeah, I remember being so surprised walking across the border from Nicaragua to Costa Rica and getting on this bus to Liberia. I was totally had this perception I was going to meet all these kind of English speakers, and I couldn't wait because it can be very taxing to constantly translate another language that's not your home, first language. And I was the only white American guy on my bus, which was fine, of course, but I was kind of like, thinking, Costa Rica, where is everybody? And we drove through a lot of parts that had the same tin roofs and small huts that I had seen throughout Nicaragua and Guatemala, not really passing any big resorts. And so that was interesting to me to see that, my perception of Costa Rica prior towards seeing it with my own eyes was just these lush resorts and beaches. But, Costa Rica does experience like levels of poverty and has slums that maybe not to the amount that is prevalent in some of the surrounding countries, but it definitely wasn't all these pristine beach type settings. But of course, I made my way to Liberia and then got to my eventual destination, which was a beautiful place. But it did make me realize that, it's not just all nice resorts.
Sure. And what was San Jose like, the capital and largest city in Costa Rica?
I didn't spend too much time. I only spent like 1 or 2 nights there, and I didn't really explore too much. It really just felt like a city. I don't know. It was a city surrounded on the perimeters. It was beautiful because the perimeters were like, green, lush, but in the middle was just like any other city, really. Cars, buses, a lot going on. But I spent most of the time just hanging out in the hostel, catching up on some reading and writing, and just kind of laying low.
Sure. But I bet at that point, being in a city of that size was different from what you had grown accustomed to over the previous few months.
Very, very accurate point there. It was, from being constantly surrounded by just pristine nature and kind of a little more rural, being in the city was definitely different. And you could kind of feel it. It was a different feel from the people. Not good or bad, just different,
Yeah. All right. So what were some of your other impressions of Costa Rica and of the culture there?
I loved Costa Rica. I mean, I found that the people, especially once I got to Uvita, which was the town I was in, people really lived that pura vida lifestyle. Like it wasn't, which translates to like pure life or easy living or happy living. I found that to be true. Like people just seemed very kind and they weren't in a rush. They just kind of were living life more moment to moment. And from people kind of giving, hitchhiking, but in this town, it wasn't like a big deal. They just give you a ride to the beach or something. Just to talking with people and locals. It was just a very pleasant way of life. And I think I'm sure it has something to do with the nature because it out of all three places I went, they were all beautiful and amazing in their own way. But Costa Rica, from an aesthetic point of view, had something about it that was just above and beyond. And so I really feel like that kind of makes it different from like an energetic feel standpoint because you're just surrounded by this and you can't help but just feel so relaxed. And the people, Ticos they call them, were just really nice.
Yeah. All right. Now I want to turn our attention to a few themes that were in your book over the entire course of the book. And that'll be where we conclude our conversation. But the first one I want to look at is soccer being a universal language. You've already touched on that, but just how powerful is that idea of soccer being a universal language, and just how valuable was soccer and your background with soccer in helping you make connections to the people that you met along the way?
So I played soccer for about 14 years of my life, and coming to these countries, I knew soccer was popular, and I knew that, I had experiences when I was little. Soccer in countries war-torn and peaceful, soccer has this universal language to it. And from being stuck on that bus and making friends in the beginning of my journey to connecting with the locals and playing, it really served as this vehicle for connection. It's like, whatever your skin color, whatever your nationality, whatever language you speak, it doesn't matter because through the game of soccer, you can experience joy and connection and fun. And it's a wave. It really is a universal language. So that was very powerful for me. And as I continue to travel, and I have traveled, I found the same thing time and time again. Soccer is a powerful vehicle for connection.
All right. Now, how about your decision not to bring a cell phone, not to be thinking about social media, and to have your only connection to the outside world, I guess we could say, be email access through very, very limited and rare Wi-Fi options. So what was that experience like?
That was arguably one of the greatest decisions I've ever made. I felt like I was using social media in sort of an unhealthy manner before leaving. I was not in a good place and sort of had a cool Instagram feed and all that jazz and, like the whole keeping up with the Joneses type thing. And I realized like I just wasn't happy. I didn't really care about what all these people were posting, like, sort of like a highlight reel. And I realized like I just needed to get away from that. I wanted to live life. Today's world, there's like two paradigms. There's real life and there's social. And both are very real in their own respective ways. But I needed to just focus on one of those paradigms. And after 1 or 2 days, like I'd never thought about any of my social media apps. It really became a focus on real life. And I found that my ability to connect with people and be present was so much stronger. My focus and appreciation for moments changed. And I think that there is a power in kind of disconnecting from the digital world, and not that you have to do it for 4 months like I did, but I found that it was so powerful for me and allowed me to experience a way of life and a perspective and a mindset that wasn't altered by external influences as much.
Sure. Now, one theme throughout the book, and we've touched on this a little already, but the general kindness of others and how most people are good people and want to help you out, and how, even though it might sound weird to put your life and your trust in the hands of a total stranger, it's really not it's really not that strange when you're in certain situations and you're able to understand the type of person that you're dealing with. So how did the kindness of others and your ability to trust people that you had never met before, how did that factor in over the course of your journey?
It played in a very important part in my journey. It's funny, I had a psychologist, another author, who was very kind and helped me a lot with edits. And he essentially told me after editing my book, he said, your story is the hero's journey. And I didn't know what the hero's journey was, but it's essentially an element of the hero's journey is you're helped by people along the way. And as I mentioned in the beginning, getting a ride from that guy, his name was Minor, from the Guatemalan airport to the bus station, to meeting that guy, Peter, the German guy in that town, who eventually helped me find the host that I was going to stay with, and to the hitchhiking, getting a ride from him. I always had people coming in it. It's really powerful, our intentions. And I felt like one of the things that I picked up through traveling was smiling. And I've never, ever considered myself like the type of dude who smiles a lot. I would like to hope that's changed today. But really, like, approaching people with just like an open mind and a kind heart, and having that intention, because your energy speaks, right? There's all these studies that show like nonverbal communication speaks a lot more than the words we utter. So having that kind of intention, I really felt like people were just generous and they wanted to help you. And of course, this isn't to say there aren't evil people out there. There are, but my perception of traveling and of this world changed because I think we watch the news, which is true, but it shows a fraction of the reality. And the best way is to experience it with your own eyes, because most people are good at heart. And for me to experience that was just powerful, and it made me think differently about humanity.
Yeah, the news by and large tends to focus on the very small percentage of people that are criminals and not focus on the vast majority of people who aren't. So
yeah.
you can draw some bad conclusions sometimes from watching the news. All right, so one final theme I want to get to, and this is something that you talk about throughout your novel, but it's the importance of following your gut and your intuition and what you feel is right in your heart, even if that means taking risks, but following your gut and making sure that you're really living in the present instead of just longing for another time, whether it be in the future or the past. So how important is following your gut and your intuition, and how much of a factor was that in your story?
To me, that is the essence of this story, because, Steve Jobs has touched on intuition, a lot of these people that we look up to in society, because at the end of the day, each and every one of us has this little voice, and it's almost like a whisper. I believe it's Steven Spielberg. He calls it a whisper, and I love that, because to listen to your gut is not easy. We have all this external noise and friends and family and colleagues and society telling us we should do this and do that. But at the end of the day, there is this small whisper inside of us that knows what we truly want to do. And if we have the courage and the audacity and can tune into that voice, it usually shows us the right direction that feels right. And by right, I don't mean by anyone's standards, by your own, what feels true to you. And by learning to tap into that voice, we experience miracles in our everyday life. It leads us down amazing paths. It draws in people into our life. And in my own experience, I've realized that true happiness and fulfillment stems from the process of following that intuition and not always knowing where that second or third step is. But like MLK says, faith is taking that first step and knowing that the second and the third will appear. And for me, that's the essence of following our gut. And when we do that, we create the space for this spark of potential within us to ignite into what I like to call the life purpose flame. And essentially, I don't believe life purpose is found or passion is found. I believe it's created, and it's created when we have the audacity to listen to our inner voice and take that leap of faith, however that works for each of us in our own lives. And it's in that process where we find this happiness. So it's really the overarching message of the book.
Definitely. All right. So if someone has been listening to this conversation and they're inspired by what you've been discussing, and they feel that travel is something that they want to do and that they want to make a significant part of their journey in their life, what resources would you direct them to so that they can get started and start figuring out their own travel plans?
Of course. Well, my website, www.jakeheilbrunn.com, Heilbrunn. I have over 50 articles about travel, about all this stuff. and you can also get a link to the book there. So really, that's probably the best place to find information about my journey, the book, and I also have a lot of links to other great bloggers and sites that can help.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the best place to follow your work, jakeheilbrunn.com, and then as I mentioned in the introduction, the Facebook and Twitter pages as well, correct?
Yeah, and Instagram, I've been doing a lot of fun stuff there too. Yeah, all social media really. I just kind of share my heart, and the website specifically is for more practical writing and takeaways in the book stuff.
Okay, great. Well, I can't recommend this book highly enough. I very strongly encourage that everyone buy it. And if you're going to buy it, or even if you're not going to buy it, I want to remind you that the show notes page for this episode is wakeupcallpodcast.com/trail. So all the resources that we've mentioned over the course of this episode will be linked there. And if you buy the book from that link, then at no extra cost to you, you'll help support the show as well because we'll get a small commission. So if you want to buy the book, and I highly encourage it, do it through that link. You'll help both Jake and I out by doing that. So wakeupcallpodcast.com/trail is the show notes page for this episode. Again, the book that we've been discussing is Off the Beaten Trail, a young man's soul-searching journey through Central America. And it's very inspiring, very beautifully written, and it has the feel of a mystery novel almost. It's very gripping and very heart-wrenching. It's fantastic. I encourage everybody to check that out. And I also encourage everybody to subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or subscribe on Stitcher so that you can get all the episodes as quickly as possible and make sure not to miss any. And Jake, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today to join me for this conversation. This conversation's a little different than the way most conversations go on the show. The topic is a little different. It's a little out of the ordinary for the show, but it's a very important story. I feel like your story is to tell, and I hope that it's inspired someone who's listening to follow their heart as well. So thank you so much for joining me to go through your journey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. And you ask very insightful, deep questions that I haven't been asked. So thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was. I had in my mind the types of things that you were probably being asked in a lot of places. So I'm glad I was able to think of some other topics to talk about. But it's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and hopefully we can chat again.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes, or subscribe on Stitcher, and check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.